all about writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 53, part 10, on our series on writing craft. I'm Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher.
And I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning best-selling author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter. And today, we're talking about writing craft and a specific thing, which is the chapter. What is a chapter? How do you decide what your book gets divided up into chapters? How long is your chapter? What is your chapter into? It's a big question, and we're going to unpack it today. So, there are lots of ways to approach chapters. And let's throw it to Sara first. What do you think? What's a chapter to you, Sara?
A chapter to me is a mini book that usually ends on a cliffhanger.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Now, I'm going to put on my editing hat here for a second because I've read a lot of different books, a lot of different authors and styles, and I've seen a lot of different chapters and philosophies on how to make a chapter. There's two things you said there, Sara, which I think are both spot on and very relevant. But the idea of what makes a chapter can be a little broader than just those things. So, for example, I've seen people who write every single scene is a chapter. So it doesn't matter how long the scene is. The scene could be half a page. The scene could be 10 pages. Every scene is a chapter. That's one way to do it. Another way is every dramatic beat, which is a little trickier, but kind of like you said, how each chapter is a little story on its own. You take the reader from the opening through the action to a satisfying conclusion, and that is your chapter, a dramatic beat. Or I've seen it at the other end where just a section of the book, like your book is 100,000 words and it's got 7 chapters because each one is massive. It's like this part of the book is chapter 2. So there are no hard and fast rules on what makes a chapter. And it does come down to each author and your own individual style. But there are definitely some tips on how to make your chapters more compelling, more effective, and to help the reader go along. So let's talk about one of the things you said, Sara, the cliffhanger. This is an interesting point because I have heard, basically 2 very different opinions on whether chapters should end with cliffhangers or not. So what are your thoughts?
And I say cliffhanger by meaning you've left the action of the book unresolved. You've moved your characters forward. You've moved the plot forward. There's been an overarching event or change for your character, and you've left them in a position where things are still unsettled. And so you want to know what happens next. And so it's not a cliffhanger like they fell off a cliff and you cut it. Like, it's much more nuanced and subtle. But in my opinion, that's what kind of, especially in historical fiction, which can run a little slower and you're not really having big explosions and shock things. You're doing a lot more emotional storytelling. You're leaving the people going, well, I care about them and things aren't perfect yet for them. What happens next and how is this going to resolve for them? Or I'm, emotionally invested and I really am worried about whether they're going to be okay. And so that's what I mean when I say a cliffhanger. And really what it's trying to do is still keep that momentum and the interest going. And I will say, I do think different genres can use chapters in a different way. And I'll point out, for instance, Dan Brown, thriller writing, Daniel Silva, they write very short chapters. I remember the first time I read Da Vinci Code, and I think there's like 100 and some chapters in this book. And some are half a page. It's like a paragraph, and then it's the next chapter. But what that does is it creates urgency. So you're constantly turning the page and keep going, and it does feel like a breathless sprint to the end. And that is specific to that genre and that type of storytelling. And you are being left a little breathless and a little mini cliffhanger on the end of those chapters, and
Okay.
that result.
Yeah. A couple of things. Great. A couple of things there. I'm pleased that the you made a statement which made me go, and then I asked you to explain it, and of course I got a far more nuanced, intelligent answer than I would have thought, which I expect from
Okay,
someone
sorry.
like you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned Dan Brown, the Da Vinci Code, which is great because the Da Vinci Code is the quintessential example of the cliffhanger chapter. You're absolutely right. Like every single chapter, it ends on a oh no, and then you go to the next chapter, and that oh no gets resolved, and then they go on and then oh no, and then you go to another one, and it's frantic, it's breathless, keeps you moving. And who am I to criticize the Da Vinci Code? But that is a style of writing which can frankly be exhausting. So depending on what you're trying to get across as the author, using a full-on cliffhanger at the end of every chapter can become a bit much. And I like what you said, Sarah, how there is a heightening of tension at the end of the chapter. It's not necessarily that our heroes are in peril or that something surprising has just happened. It doesn't have to be that, but there's sort of this, okay, we've gotten through the events of this chapter. There's been a rise and fall of drama, but then at the end, oh, what's this? A surprise or a new thought or a new revelation or something that,
Unsettlement. Like it's
yeah, yeah, right.
I suppose this is good enough in this moment tonight, but you know that your character or characters are still not at the end of their journey.
That's
So
right.
it is quieter, but I guess I very rarely end a chapter going, okay, everything is
Yep.
roses, moving on to
Ah,
chapter 7. Like
yeah.
what there that's not then you've probably hit a climax too soon in your the waves of your book.
hmm
So,
this is a great point about how to divide your book into chapters. Because there are other ways to look at it, and maybe we'll come back to those. But how you end the chapter is really important because you're spot on. The purpose of the end of the chapter is to get the reader to flip the page and start the next one. Like that is the whole purpose of it. And there are fewer compliments I appreciate more than when a reader finds me and says, "I got a bone to pick with you. I was up till 3 in the morning reading your book. I got no sleep." Oh, thanks.
yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's great. And I enjoy reading those books too. Like, oh man, I just can't stop. I must stop. I can't stop. It's great fun. And the way that you do that is by setting up that tension at the end of the chapter. Now, it doesn't have to be the Dan Brown style of, oh no, physical violence, cliffhanger, danger. Like, it doesn't have to be that. And certainly for our listeners who don't write thrillers and don't write action books, there's lots of ways to do that. And I think, Sarah, you summed it up really well. Like, yeah, it can be a slow burn, it can be a psychological tension, it can be an unease. Things are just not settled. It could be that the immediate peril, whatever it was, is resolved in this chapter, but there's still stuff outstanding, and it gets people to turn the page.
Right.
So as we look at chapters, it's funny, we looked at the end of them first. I mean, this is kind of a theme of ours, actually. Let's look at the end first. But how you end your chapter is very important. It can really help you decide where to cut your story. But stepping back, looking at the chapters themselves, like when you first lay out your outline, if you are one of those authors who outlines, you will inevitably be making these chunks of your book. Okay, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and usually each one of those this happens is probably going to be one of your proto chapters of, okay, here's a thought, here's a thing, an action, an event that is kind of self-contained. That's a good place to start when you're starting to think about how to lay out your chapters. And that's what I mentioned earlier, the way that you define your chapters, that's a dramatic beat, is that something starts at the beginning of the chapter, you go through it, you have your heightened tension, you resolve it in some way, and then ideally, as you say, Sarah, there's a little bit of a surprise at the end to lift the tension. That's the dramatic beat way of writing a chapter. You can have multiple point of views in there, you can have multiple time shifts, whatever you need, place shifts, all those things. that's how you approach your chapters, the dramatic beat. And so that's one way to do a chapter. And it's a good way. I like it. I think that it makes sense. It gives the reader a sense of satisfaction, whether the reader is aware of it or not. They've been carried through this little mini story, and hopefully they're not conscious of it, but it will make them feel good. And, okay, that was a really good chapter. Now I want to turn the page. So that's good. The dramatic beat is a great way to divide up your book. How do you do it, Sarah, when you're dividing up your book?
Mostly like that. I mean, obviously, some of my books are divided by character.
Mm-hmm.
So each chapter is a beat, but also a beat that drives a story together, but also is contained to the point of view of that one character for that beat and that arc. So that's a very easy way to, also divide up your book. Different characters from different points of view can help push a lot more story through because they're able to add, and you're getting all those points of view to push through a lot of action in a way, or
Mm-hmm.
get a bigger piece of the story done. There are times where it's all one character, and then it is more just those dramatic beats,
Mm-hmm.
and things that we've done. We also do character, and the characters push the story through. I have also read books that do kind of do the chunks. Usually those are fantasy books, if I recall, where it's much more just like this big chunk and then part two instead of chapter two, and it's just big chunks broken up by maybe, an asterisk or some sort of denotion that we're shifting gears, we're shifting time, we're shifting location, maybe even point of view. So if you're doing those big chunks, you still, instead of it just being one big chunk, are still kind of breaking up
Mm-hmm.
to show, it's now been 3 months later, or it's now been a week later, or it's a different point of view, or like, even if you're writing in the chunky, every chapter is 50 pages or 100 pages or, you know,
Yeah.
20,000 words, there's usually still some breaking up of action or drama or things like that to help your readers take a break.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, a point of view shift is a great reason to change chapters. And yeah, and I know in your books you do that. Every chapter starts with this is the narrator for this book.
Yeah.
I know in my earlier books I had 4 point of view characters, and I did the same. Is every time I was going to switch point of view, I would switch chapter, which makes sense. It's an obvious break. It lets, especially if you're writing in first person, it lets the reader reset so they realize who they're with now. Um, it did for me in my earlier books. It made for some very long chapters because
Mhm.
I'm with one character for a long time before I switch to another. And I remember my editor making me cut a lot of my chapters in half because he said, "No, they're too long. You've got to break them so that people feel that sense of urgency." It you know, and I wasn't going to insert false cliffhangers into the middle of my chapters, but even that break was enough to give the reader a sense of progress. And it's an interesting question about how long should your chapters be. There's lots of good reasons to build your chapters around like dramatic beats, point of view, same time and place. That's another great reason to change chapters. Is we're moving to a different place or we're taking a jump in time. That's a very obvious place to break a chapter. But sometimes your dramatic beat requires you to jump from points of view or time and place, and so you want to keep it in the same chapter. So it is a bit of a mix, but then it comes down to length, and this is sort of a great debate that I have been embroiled in for the last 15, 20 years of how long should chapters be. And there is no hard and fast rule, and it does depend on what the author wants and what the style of writing is. Fantasy books, like you said, tend to have longer chapters because fantasy books tend to be longer. They tend to be richer and vaster, and they also tend to move at a slightly more stately pace. So having a big, long read is okay. Um, but yeah, then you get writers who are just boom, 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 and literally the chapter is a page and a half long. And you can make that work. It's just it's got to be done right. So I feel like I'm saying, there's really no good answer here. There is, but there's
Well,
lots of different
I think
preferences.
what we don't want people to say, we don't want people to walk away and say, oh, there is a page count, a word count, or anything that is a standard, because there's not. Some of
Mhm.
it's genre specific, but I think really what we're saying without saying it yet is chapters are a tool to help you with the pacing of your book.
Yes.
And that's really what they're there for. They are a construct that allows you to pace your book and to have your beats happen at the pace that you want them to. Hence, thrillers. Matthew Riley is another writer that's like Dan Brown. Short chapters. You walk in and there's bullets flying, and there is no break, and it is very breathless and page turny. Um, and and things are happening nonstop. That is facilitated as well by the shorter chapters, and that those chapters are actually a tool within the book to help with the pacing they want you as the reader to experience. Whereas if you are doing longer chapters, or you're taking your time to get your beats and your nuances across, that's a very different pace, and your chapters should reflect that. And so
Hmm.
really that's what chapters are there for. They are there to help you with your pacing.
Yeah, and I have found sometimes that I've laid out my outline and I've got all of my dramatic beats that each one is going to be a chapter, and it all makes sense to me. I've looked at the flow, everything looks good. But then I get to a chapter and I start writing it, and it turns out this chapter is actually a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. Maybe it's actually more complex and needs more unpacking, or maybe there's some setup that I just have to do in order for the thing to happen. And so I will find sometimes that um, like I'm aiming for my chapters to be about 5,000 words. It's sort of where I aim just for the pacing of my books. It doesn't have to be exact, but somewhere around 5,000 words. But then all of a sudden I'll find, I'm still in this chapter. I'm now at 11,000 words and I'm still in this chapter. So something's got to change, right? And that's a good time for me to stop and go, okay, a couple of things. Maybe I just need to cut this chapter in two. Like maybe there's just too much going on here. It's more than one beat that I didn't realize. And so if I can just find a logical place, so you know what, this is a beat, this is a second beat, I'll just cut it there and actually make it two chapters. Or maybe I'm just wasting a lot of time, and I'm trying to get to the dramatic beat, but I've got 8,000 words of setup. So that's a problem. Maybe I need to cut this chapter and either work that information earlier in the book so that it's set up, or do I actually need it at all? Like, why is it there? Maybe I don't need this. So I don't think that we need to be uh, like dead set on my chapters must be this long. But if you find a chapter is much longer than the others or much shorter than the others, have a look at it. Is there something wrong here? Maybe you did it on purpose, but maybe you didn't. And so maybe it might not be fitting the pace of your book, and you have to figure out why.
That's a really good point. And I agree, sometimes you can sense this is feeling a little light, or how long has I been at it? And I think if you are feeling that, you know, you're probably listen to your gut. I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
great point. And I know I've run into that too. I'm sure, and like you have, it's common. That's a
Mm-hmm.
common problem when you are figuring out your chapters and your pace essentially too.
Yeah, because sometimes when you look at the outline and you look at your beats, you might think that, oh, yeah, that beat naturally follows that beat. But when you get there, you realize, that first beat actually created a whole bunch of complications that I hadn't really thought through. I cannot jump straight to this next beat. It's not going to work. So what do I do with that? So either maybe another chapter has to go in there, or I have to rework what I was doing. I mean, who knows? This is the fun of writing. But I find that the chapters, yeah, it's a great way to say it, Sarah. They are a tool for us to pace our books. And if the chapters are getting out of whack for some reason, there might be a problem with the pacing that we need to look at.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. So I
That's all
think
I
that's
got.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So advice to our listeners, don't worry about making sure that your chapters are all exactly the same length, or that they're all really long or all really short. Do whatever is natural to you, but do be conscious of them. be aware that if you're going to break your own rule, that's fine, but make sure there's a good reason for it. And if you find you can't, maybe you need to step back and take another look at your overall story and see what's going on. So, chapters.
Well, that's our show today, everyone. Chapters. Do not forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of these chats. And please leave a review. It helps us a lot. You can also find Ben at bennettrcoles.com, as well as on Facebook and on Instagram.
And you can catch up with Sarah at sarahdahlman.com and on Instagram. Thanks for joining us today. Please reach out if there are any topics you'd like us to cover, and we'll see you again when we next chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sara.